The longest any human being is known to have lived, backed up by irrefutable evidence, is the 122 years and 164 days which Jeanne Calment of France reached in 1997. She remains the only person proven to have lived to see their 120th birthday. Only two others have reached 119. Kane Tanaka, who was 119 years 107 days, and Sarah Knauss, who was 119 years 97 days old. Only 25 people with official documentation have ever lived to 116, including only one man, Jiromon Kimura. It is often thought people in the past did not live as long as people today because of average life expectancy appearing to be quite low. It is an estimate based on incomplete data for one thing, and it factors in higher child mortality. People were capable of living as long as people today. Terentia, the wife of the Roman orator Cicero, was 103. Pope Agatho is said to have been born in Sicily in 577 and died in January 681, aged 103 also. The Armenian St. John the Silent was born in 454 and died about 558, aged 104. Official documentation in the form of a government document is extremely recent, though. There were family registers in East Asia as early as the 7th century. In Europe there were church records of births. Some in France go back to 1303. In England they were kept from the 16th century, with some older church and manorial records. Sweden had a system of registration as early as 1608. However, there are gaps, records lost or destroyed, and the accuracy of many of them called into question. Even legibility issues cause problems. A gravestone in Shoreditch, England read that a man named Thomas Curran had died aged 207 on the 28th of January 1588. It's thought to be an error, and that Mr. Curran died at the creditable but not outlandish age of 107 instead. Official government recording of births mostly dates from the 19th and 20th centuries. The Netherlands' birth, death and marriage records in 1811, Great Britain in 1827, Australian states commenced with Tasmania in 1838. American states varied greatly. Hawaii and New England states as early as the 1840s, while other states did not have such documentation until 1920. As modern official documents have failed to prove more than a single death past the age of 120, should all claims of greater ages in the past be dismissed? Factors allowing age include genetics, lifestyle, and luck. Scientists have attempted to calculate an extreme age for human beings based on the longevity of those who have already reached a great age. They discovered that if a person lived to be 105, their odds of living to see their next birthday was 50-50. So if a person was 105 and managed to avoid serious illness or injury, there was really no reason that they could not reach 120. And maybe beyond. Modern biological thought is that 127 to 150 is the absolute maximum range a human body can exist and continue to repair itself naturally. Modern medical practices, while providing relief from some complaints, particularly bacterial infections, which in the past have killed huge numbers of people, are imperfect. Deaths from medical error were estimated in 2020 to have killed 250,000 people in the United States. Drugs thought safe for use are sometimes later discovered to be unfit for purpose. Then environmental factors should also be considered. Many of the claims of extreme longevity concern people who lived in farming areas, away from the cities and the Industrial Revolution. Today it is much harder to escape pollutants in the air, microplastics in food, pharmaceutical residue in water, and electromagnetic radiation, of which the detrimental effects on human health continue to be assessed. So while there is no written documentary proof which satisfies gerontological researchers, and we have to weigh up modern knowledge against modern stressors, we cannot say for certain that some of the claims of exceedingly long lives might not be true. Certainly those which fall within the 120-year limit have every chance of being accurate. The oldest known man, Kimura-san of Japan, was 116. But maybe he wasn't the oldest. For many years, another Japanese man, Shikichiyo Izumi, was thought to have died at the age of 120. It was later uncovered that he had been named after a sibling who had died young, and that he was a mere 105 when he died in 1986. Sir Fleetwood Shepherd gained a belated reputation for longevity. In 1768, the Annual Register proclaimed him still alive, aged 120. A newspaper report from 1885 says he died in Essex in 1765, aged 131. In fact, this courtier, a contemporary of Charles II and Nell Gwyn, had died on the 25th of August 1698, aged 64. In his last years, however, rumours of his death were published as true in 1694, 1697 and in 1698, just a month before he did pass away. The 1768 announcement was a satire on these reports, misunderstood by those unfamiliar with the man's personal history. Other contenders include David Tennyson of Chicago, said to be 117, for whom there was reasonable evidence of the accuracy of this claim, and Robert Bowman of England, who might have been 119. There is more evidence regarding George Fletcher of County Tyrone, Ireland, who was born on a mountain farm in 1788. He was said to have lived to at least 1906, when he was 118. A descendant of his daughter, Elizabeth Donnelly, has a photo of George taken when he was said to be 117, his mouth drooping following a stroke. He was presented with a gold snuff box on the 21st of May 1905 for being King Edward VII's oldest subject. This was maybe when the photo was taken. A woman named Methusaleh died at Zelow, Poland in 1902, alleged to be 119 years and 5 months old. Clara Powell of Arad, Romania, celebrated her 120th birthday in 1926. A journalist at the time reported the woman was well preserved. She had never suffered from illness until the age of 100. Catherine Fitzgerald, Countess of Desmond, died in 1604. She was said to be 120, or even 140, although it seems more likely she was about 100 when she died. Piast the Wheelwright, semi-legendary ancestor of the Piast dynasty of Polish kings, is said to have lived from 740 to 861, dying at the age of 120. While the people we've considered up to this point could have reached the ages claimed, they are far from the oldest asserted. In increasing order of improbability, we shall work our way up to the longest human lifespan said to have been achieved. And this is by no means a complete list of such extraordinary assertions. In 1885, a list was compiled of 210 people said to have exceeded the age of 120, 31 of whom were Irish. Of the many claimants said to have been in their 120s, these include Chaim Noah Nahankiewicz, who died at Segrava, Poland in 1902. He was said to be aged 121 years and 7 months old. Newspapers told of a mother Stavna, an old woman living in the German village of Dormovo in January 1914, when she was supposedly 119 years old. An entry in the church register of the village, where she had lived her whole life, recorded her birth as having occurred on the 16th of October, 1794. She recalled fleeing with her parents into the forest when the remnants of Napoleon's army marched back from the disastrous foray into Russia. She died aged 122. Catherine Brickland, also called Mary Buckland in reports of her 119th birthday, of Ballycommon, is said to have been aged 123 when she died in Ireland in 1934. She could recall the famine of the 1840s and the Crimean War of the 1850s. John Earl was born in the Scottish Highlands in 1779. He was a travelling shoemaker before settling down in his homeland. In 1902, at the age of 123, although deaf, he was otherwise in robust health. He lived with 3 unmarried daughters, the eldest of whom was 91. William Kennedy, who died at Holden, Alberta in 1923, had a baptism certificate from Enniskillen, County Fermanagh, dated 25th of September 1802, stating that he was 5 years old when baptised. He could read without glasses and shaved himself until just 2 weeks before his death at the age of 125. The cause of his death was recorded as senility and exhaustion. American man Jackson Pollock, or Pollard, who died in 1995, was said to be 125, having been born in 1869. Frau Dutkovich of Posen, born on the 21st of February 1785, was said to be the world's oldest woman, aged 125, in 1910. A challenge to her record came from Baba Vasilka, a woman in Bavelsko, Bulgaria, whose birth was in May 1784 and who was therefore 126. She had worked in the fields for over a century, but in 1910 was living on a pension funded by her 100 descendants. She still had good eyesight and hearing, and could walk without support. A recent claimant is Natabi Tinsu of Azifa, Eritrea. He is said to have been born in 1884 or 1894. He was baptised in the later year, but his family said he was 10 years old at the time. So when he died in 2021, he was 127 or 137 years old. A priest said church records showed the man was 127. His wife had died in 2019, aged 99. Another man who said he was 127 was Billy Payton. In February 1920, and then living in Ohio, he said he had been born a slave in 1813. Anna Chrysler of Riga, Latvia, was born on the 21st of May 1801 and died in February 1930. If that was so, she would have been 128, although it was reported she was 129. Whatever her exact age, she credited a diet of raw herrings dipped in weak black coffee for her longevity. According to monastic records at Bivona, Italy, Scholastica Oliveri lived from 1448 to 1578, making her 129 or 130 at death. Annie Lou of South Africa was said to be still living, aged 130, in 1937. Another South African, said to be either 130 or 140, was a bushman named Jan, when he passed away on the 19th of July, 1924. Noah Raby of New Jersey was born in 1772 and died in 1904, aged 132. He lived in the poorhouse at New Brunswick in the last years of his life, toothless and blind. Jan Krasinski claimed to be the last survivor of Napoleon's armies when he returned home to Poland to settle down in 1922, aged 132. Major Edward James Monroe of the United States was an old fibber. He was old, but his exact age is unknown. He claimed to be a son of President Monroe and was born on the 4th of July 1815 and to have served in the Confederate Army in the Civil War. Neither of these statements were true. In September 1946, he was featured in newspapers when he said he was 131 years old. By his reckoning, he would have been 133 years, 11 months, 24 days at death on June 28, 1949, in Florida. A newspaper article published in September 1902 mentioned a couple in Japan. The wife was 135, the husband was 133, and they had 14 children, the eldest two being 108 and 105 years old. None of this incredible family were named. Another American, Johnny Schell, was said to have been born in 1788 and lived in Louisville, Kentucky, 1922, aged 134. He is reportedly in full possession of his faculties up to the end of his life. His eldest son, aged 90, attended the funeral. His youngest son was 27, which infers he fathered him at the age of 106. Other sources, however, suggest he may have been as young as 99 when he died. Abdul Kaus died in May 1946 in Adelaide, South Australia. He was a very old man, and his claimed age of 111 may well be correct. He had arrived in Australia 80 years earlier, where he worked as a camel driver in Queensland in the 1860s. He claimed to have fought in wars in India in the 1840s, and those who remembered him from 60 years before said he was old even then. Not sure of his actual age, Abdul had merely said he was over 100 for the past 23 years. Members of the small Muslim community of Adelaide reckoned he was 134. Ahmet Bey was alive in Constantinople in 1936. His age was, he proclaimed, 135. He was a friend of Zaro Agar, but more of Mr. Agar later. Katie Farney was the South African woman who died in 1942 at Port Alfred. Her age was said to be 136. An article published in March 1903 about the most recent United States Census mentioned that the oldest living white man was a Russian named Izry Rudovsky, who was 136. In the US, there were 86 people over 128, of whom 28 were men and 58 were women. The oldest person was a black woman aged 150. With the exception of one Native American, everybody over the age of 115 was black. Swami Govindanath Barati, a Hindu saint, was allegedly born in 1826 and died in 1963, at the age of either 136 or 137. His longevity was due to his mental will after decades of intense meditation. He supposedly met many world leaders during his travels, including Queen Victoria and Teddy Roosevelt. Yet another old American was John Smith, a Chippewa man. He died of pneumonia at Cass Lake, Minnesota in April 1922, reputedly in his 138th year. Federal Commissioner of Indian Enrollment, Ransom J. Powell, however, said a disease made John appear greatly aged, and that his real age was only 88. John had told a boy that he was either 7, 8, 9, or 10 years of age when the stars fell. This was a reference to a massive meteorite shower over North America at dawn on the 13th of November, 1833. So awe-inspiring was the event that it was often used as a fixed point for chronological calculation by those who had observed it. That being so, he would have been somewhere between 96 and 99 years old when he died. Hajj Tahir of Arabia was described to the Royal Geographical Society in London in 1925 by a Mr. Philby, who had met the old man while in Transjordania. Tahir said he was born in 1786 and was 140, rounded up it seems. He, like Mother Stavner, claimed to have seen Napoleon. It was in 1799, when the Corsican general was in Syria. While Tahir claimed to be 140, he also said he was born in Mecca in 1801, which would have made him 124. He also said he did not marry until he was 70, to explain why his children were all born more recently than maybe could have been expected. Tahir was growing a third set of teeth, a phenomenon reported in rare instances by very elderly people. Another purported 140-year-old was Juan Bhaskar, who died in the Philippines in 1936, as were Rebecca Fury of Falmouth, Jamaica, and Sarah Anderson, a former slave who was granted her freedom on her 100th birthday. A woman claiming to be 140 died also in 1936. Her name was Aziza Bent Otman Natta. She allegedly outlived two of her daughters, who both died in their 90s, and was nearly blind, but credited her long life to doing housework. Romonalwana Senan of Bechuanaland, today called Botswana, was 141 in September 1938. There was evidence that he was a warrior in Chaka's army, who fought in battles around 1815 to 1818, according to John Harris of an anti-slavery society. In 1927, Ivan Shapkov, a Russian man, said he was born in 1782 and was consequently 145 years old. This is another story which involves Napoleon. Ivan, a soldier who had fought the French, got drunk to celebrate the Corsicans' retreat from Moscow, and as a result was placed in the guardhouse. He swore he had not been drunk ever since. He was living a happy life with his sixth wife, a stripling of 88. A few years earlier, in 1922, a Turkish man named Djuru Cemdine announced that he was 145 years old, having been born in 1775. He had gone to get a job in the Paris music halls, but returned to Constantinople, unable to find one. At home he worked as a porter, providing for his seventh wife, who was aged 40, and his son, who was 90. He looked like a man of 70 in good health. Supposedly a doctor had told him he could live another 20 years, due to his heart being an abnormal size. Mbagotho of Sragen in Java turned 146 years old in 2016, according to Indonesian authorities, having been born on the 31st of December 1870. The old man had prepared his own gravestone when he was 122, but had still not had a reason to use it. He had outlived his 4 wives and all of his children. The lifelong smoker died in April 2017. It was later found that he was more probably born in 1916, making him a youthful 101. In 1926, a woman in Persia was said to be alive at the age of 146. For good measure, she had a son who was aged 117. A Colonel Winslow is supposed to have died at Tipperary in 1766, at the age of 146. Nothing is known of this man except he was endowed with great physical prowess and endurance. A Swedish sailor and adventurer, C.J. Drakenberg, was 146 years and 11 months old. It is thought this may be another case of a man having the same name as a family member, perhaps a grandfather, and the dates of the two being conflated together. Bridget Devine, an Irish washerwoman, died aged 147 in Manchester, England, 1845. The oldest doctor ever was claimed to be Dr. William Mead, who, if he really was 148, certainly knew his trade. Now we get to the really old people. Zaire Effendi, a Kurdish man said to be 151 years old in 1925, having a passport which stated he was born in 1774, was on his way from Belgrade to Italy and then to America. As he was going to perform in a show declaring his longevity, his claims to his age, his 27 wives, and his favourite daughter having died at the age of 91, are somewhat suspect. One of the most famous cases of extreme old age is that of the Englishman Old Parr. Thomas Parr was born, according to legend, in 1483, and died on the 14th of November 1635, aged 152. He lived on a diet of bread and cheese, and when his reputed age made him famous, he was summoned to London by King Charles I. While there, he died. The celebrated physician William Harvey conducted an autopsy and found Tom's organs were in perfect health, and a cause of death could not be discerned. Harvey was of the opinion the man was about 70 years of age. However, if his age was estimated on the condition of his organs, then it could be argued that because his organs were so healthy, is why he lived to such a phenomenal age. Some say he was actually born in 1565, and the man born in 1483 was Parr's grandfather. Starka Marova said she was 152 years old in 1931. Her advice for reaching this monumental age was to always carry a potato upon your person to ward off rheumatism. Mohammed bin Zarai died in the village of Sada Ayad, Saudi Arabia, in March 2013, at the reputed age of 154. After his last wife died when he was 150, he was looking for a new one. A woman in the mountain village of Javarsha, Yugoslavia, Stojka Bakic, was 155 in 1934 and confided that she was tired of life. She had outlived all her 7 children. When asked her opinion of girls of the 1930s, she declared, "When I was a girl, I used to milk 100 goats a day. Modern girls can't milk more than 20. A certain Joshua Hightree was said to be 156. An Arab sheikh named Rafai Rabal in September 1930 was reportedly 157 years old. Jonas Surrington was mentioned as being 159 years of age when he died at Bergen, Norway in 1797. An unnamed Indian woman in Orissa, alive in 1936, was said to be 160. Another anonymous 160-year-old was a woman in Angora in 1929. Bazgul Khan of India in 1934 claimed to be 160. One of the most famous claimants to an amazing age was Zaro Agar of Constantinople. His birth year was somewhere between 1774 and 1777. He was often mentioned in newspapers in the 1920s and 30s. His age seemed to change with the stories, so that he was 143 in November 1929, when he was mistakenly reported killed in a car accident. In 1930, it was said he was 156. He died in 1934 when he was supposedly 160. Experts x-rayed his bones and claimed that he was not that ancient, just a callow 120 years old. Further research in 1939 suggests that this old rogue was a mere 97. Fatma Hanum, born in 1767, also was said to have reached her 160th year in 1927, and was then reported to have reached her 163rd birthday in September 1930. Judith Scott was 162 at the time of her demise in 1800 at Islington, London, according to tradition. Dakabo Eba from Ethiopia was said to be 163, claiming to be born in 1853 and passing away in 2015. Once more from Turkey came the claim by a certain Timur in 1932 to be 165 years of age. Sarah Brookman was alleged to be 166 when she died in Glastonbury in 1793. Jonas Warren died at Ballydoyle Island, 1787, aged 167. William Edwards of Cardiff, Wales, died in 1668 when he was supposedly 168. Henry Jenkins was 169, if we are to believe tradition. He was buried in Yorkshire on the 9th of December 1670. He said he was born in 1501, and as a boy of 12 had carried arrows to the English archers at the Battle of Flodden. Haji Yusuf of Malacca in 1928 was still flourishing at 170. James Olofintuyi of Nigeria was supposedly 171 in 2015. Luisa Trucho of Tucumán, Brazil, was 174 when she finally died in 1780. Golor Magrain, who died on the island of Jura in 1805, was a reputed 180 years of age. Then there were three men who all attested that they were 185 years old. The first was Peter Taunton of Romania, who allegedly lived from 1539 to 1724. Then there was Petrash Zartan of Hungary, who said he was born in 1724. Thirdly, Jose Calvario of Mexico was born in 1727 and died in 1912. He had been regarded as the oldest man living in Tuxpan for 75 years. And they would be the oldest claimants, you might think, but no. Some claims are for over 200 years. At Ekaterinburg, Russia in 1812, it was rumoured that a man had died who was aged between 200 and 205. Li Chung-yun of Sichuan died in 1933. He claimed he had been born in 1677. If that was so, he would have been 256 years old. His 24th wife, in 1929, was a babe in arms of 60. A Scotsman named Kirk Campbell was said to have been born in 1601 and lived 258 years until his death in 1859. There are other claimed ages beyond this, but each becomes more fantastical than the last. For instance, Ignác Slutsky, alias Antony Kolchak, who is buried in Brodno Cemetery in Poland, was, according to the gravestone, born in 1231 and died in September 1913, aged 682. Perhaps that he is also described as a vampire makes it plausible. But then, wouldn't he have been undead for 600 years? Of course, beyond these humble claims of common folk, there are legends of demigods, heroes, and ancestors who lived for much, much longer. Methusaleh, according to biblical tradition, lived 969 years. In Falun Gong tradition, Chen Jun was born in 881, but did not die until 1326, making him 445 years old. In Vietnamese myth, the Dragon King of Lac, Lac Long Quan, lived for about 300 years in the 3rd millennium BC. In the mythology of the Jain religion, some personages are said to have lived for millions of years. Of course, while there are many who simply lie and others who overestimate ages, or have no means of recalling exactly how old they are, there are others who put their ages down due to error or vanity. Frau Sophie Brechter of Mannheim received dozens of letters of congratulations on attaining her 100th birthday in 1902. The old lady declared in annoyance that she was only 88, an age those who knew her said she had been for 12 years. So just who the person who has lived the longest really is will never be known as an absolute certainty. Though doubtless many more will claim the record, the answer will remain in the dark corners of history.